When was the last time that you knew you had power? Maybe it was this morning as you drove to church. Maybe you have a big vehicle. Because you had the bigger vehicle than the other car, you knew at that moment you had power. Maybe you got a promotion this last week. About time, right? You know? You felt entitled to finally get in that spot, and now you find yourself in that spot, and you get that feel of now I have power, I have some authority. Maybe you're good at sports and you found yourself at times on whatever the sports venue is, knowing that you are the best on that field at that moment. There's a sense of that power that comes. Maybe you're that person in your group of friends who sort of holds everybody together. And you know that's an important spot to be in, but you also know there's power involved in that. All of us at some moment in our lives discover that we have power. Sometimes we tell people, I know what my rights are, and because I have rights, I have power. I can say this, I can do this, and you can't do that. And sometimes power makes us feel entitled. Sometimes power can lead us to feel uncomfortable, unsure. But what do you do when you discover that wherever you're at that moment, in that room or on that field, on that road, that you are the most powerful person there? What do you do with that power? I think power is a fitting topic to talk about given the state of our country over the last few weeks. The seeming abuse of power in some places. The failure to be able to protect legal powers. We've had a week of one person and an upcoming week of another person who wants to become what people will describe as the most powerful person in the world. And they will make their arguments of why they should be the most powerful person in the world. But our question always ought to be, what would that person do with that power? What do we do with our power? And it's fitting because of the topic we're going to talk about, the passage that from John, as he describes sort of this scene of the thing that we're going to experience here a little bit later, but sort of the lead up to it. But before we get over to John chapter 13, I want to invite you to bow your heads and let's pray one more time together, okay? Lord, everyone in this room feels and has felt the power of power. All of us at times have misused that power. And all of us at times have probably used that power for somebody else's good. And today, as we have gathered in this space and in this place, we have the opportunity here in a few moments to experience your power for us. And to again experience that power in us. As we eat these reminders, Jesus, of your body, this bread and this juice. And as we have the chance to serve somebody else and to allow somebody to serve us. But today I pray that you would move us beyond a story of old into our stories of now. And that you would open our eyes, as Debbie has prayed, to see your creative power that is alive and well in each of us. And that you move us not only the recognition of that power, but the wise use, a God-honoring use of it. So again, we invite you into this space. We recognize your presence here, but sometimes we need to invite you into our own space. And so we do that now in your name. Amen. If you're not familiar with the Bible, let me tell you just a little bit about it. There is this section called the Gospels. You may have heard that term. It refers to the 4 sections of the Bible we call the Gospels. And it's the books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they're the sections of the Bible that describe what Jesus' life was like here on this planet. We're going to look at John's section today. And John was one was sort of described, even by his own terms, as probably the closest of any of Jesus' followers to him. He seemed to be one of the closest that when Jesus took just a small group away to do something, John was always there. And so John gives us some further insight, some different insight than Matthew does, than Mark does, or than Luke does, as Luke talked to all these different people. And so this is leading up into that moment that we call the Last Supper, or that famous picture that you've seen. This is the lead up to it, John chapter 13, verse 1. And John says, listen, it was almost time for the Passover feast. They were coming up to this feast, and something was taking place in Jesus' life. And he says this, Jesus knew that it was time for him to leave this world and go back to the Father. That John says that something happened in Jesus' mind, in Jesus' life, almost like an epiphany, that all of a sudden, he kind of knew his whole life, sort of this calling and sort of what he was supposed to do, but all of a sudden Jesus knew that it was about to end. And he goes on and says a little bit more of the backstory. The devil had already persuaded, that is put into the heart of Judas to turn against, that is betray Jesus. And so that's already started to take place. And so Jesus gathered on this night with at least his 12 disciples, and Judas is one of them, but that's already been setting in plans. And more than that, John goes back and says Jesus knew something else. That he knew that the Father had given him power over everything. And that he had come from God, and that he was going back to God. That on this night, as the Passover was coming, Jesus became clear about it was almost to end, and things were set in motion, and Judas is going to do his thing. But also this recognition came to Jesus, almost like a little light bulb that said, he knew now that all this power had been given to him. And that as this end was drawing close, that this power was given for some important reason. And here's the thing I don't want us to miss. What Jesus knew determined what Jesus did. What Jesus knew determined what Jesus did. He knew that all power had been given him. He knew that things were drawing to a close. And because he knew that, he did some things. And here's a little bit of what if. What if that was true for us? What if the things that you knew, the things that I knew, determined what we did? Because let's be honest. We all know more than we do, right? How many of you this week, through your mind, or maybe out loud of your mouth, came this statement, I know I should, but... Anybody out there? Right, I know I should, but, I know I should have signaled before crossing over, but it's just a tight spot, I had to get in there, I know I should have waited, I know I should take it, Well, we do it all the time, right? But for Jesus, what he knew determined what he was going to do. And here's the crazy thing. I want you to notice what Jesus did when he knew what determined this. Here's what Jesus did. So during the meal, so get this picture in your mind. They're now at the Passover. Jesus leading up this, knows this stuff. He gets there. They're eating the meal. And at some point during the meal, Jesus stood up and took off his outer garment. Now, oftentimes, if you've read the story before, you think, well, that kind of makes sense because what Jesus is going to do next, you already kind of know what's going to happen. It makes sense to take off your outer so you don't get it wet, don't get it dirty, right? But that is not why Jesus took off his outer garment. He takes it off because this is a symbol of something. Jesus' clothes, his outer garment, would have been a rabbinic robe. It would have been something that people looked at him as a teacher. Teachers wore certain things. I mean, how many of you are teachers out here? I know some of you are, right? Teachers, right? All right. Do you have certain outfits you got to wear at work, right? You know what? You walk in a classroom, not just because of age, but you know the teacher's normally the better dressed one in the room, right? Right. So when Jesus stands up and takes off, this is more than just him. He's going to say this so it doesn't get dirty. This is him standing up and making a statement. That he's laying aside this rabbinic, this kind of big teacher role because of what he's going to do next. And John says, as they watch the scene, they're all eating, they're all talking, and all of a sudden Jesus stands up, he takes off his clothes, his outer garment, everybody kind of looks at him, and then Jesus takes his towel, and he wraps it around his waist, and then he pours water into a bowl and began to wash the disciples' feet. And I'm guessing at some moment, everybody stopped eating Stop talking and just watch Jesus. Jesus doesn't say anything when he does this. They're just all eating, and he gets up, takes it off, puts his towel, and he begins to wash their feet. He begins to dry them with a towel that's wrapped around him. And then Jesus comes to Simon Peter. And if you know the story, you know what happens, right? Jesus has already washed, and we don't know how many disciples' feet. He's washed at least one, if not two or three. He gets to Peter, and you know the story. Peter says, not going to happen, Jesus, right? I mean, what's the matter with you, Jesus? And what's going through Peter's mind is what's gone through all the other disciples' minds. Because when Jesus has stood up and when he begins to wash people's feet, they all thought, oh, I probably should have done that. Oh, I should have made plans for that. I should have hired somebody to, yeah, I should have been the one. But Jesus has already beat them to it. Jesus is already doing this. And Peter says, no, Jesus, you're not going to do this because I know where those hands have been. I've seen those hands that you're using to wash everybody's feet. I've seen them take dirt off the ground, spit in them, make this thing and touch people's eyes and bring healing to their eyes. I've seen that hand reach out and lift somebody back up. Jason talked about resurrection. I've seen somebody resurrected by those hands. I've seen those hands take a couple of loaves of bread and produce hundreds, if not thousands, of loaves of bread. I've seen those hands, Jesus, and there's no ways, those special hands, those surgeon hands, those hands that are not going to get clean, those hands are going to get dirty on my feet. Not going to happen, Jesus. Get up. To which, if you remember the story, Jesus says, Peter. Oh, man, you're giving me a headache. Peter. If I don't do this for you, you're not part of the group. To which Peter, as we know, kind of goes the other way. Well, hey, if that's the case, wash my hands, wash my feet, my head, throw water on me, just soak me down, Jesus. To which Jesus says, Peter, calm down. Anybody that's already had a bath, and he's kind of alluding to this idea of being baptized and being part of that. Anybody that's already had that doesn't need to take a bath again. I know your feet are dirty. I know your life got dirty. Everybody's life gets dirty. You just need to wash the dirt off the feet. And he does that. And Jesus works around that room, and nobody's saying anything. Everybody's just watching this. They're feeling bad. They're feeling guilty because somebody should have done it. They should have done it. And they're feeling weird about it. Because Jesus should not be washing their feet. Not his role. Not his job. It says, John picks it up and says, listen, when Jesus had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes, put on this outer garment, he becomes the rabbi again, and he sits down, and then he asks them this question. Do you understand what I've just done for you? Now remember, Jesus has been with the 12 disciples for about 3.5 years now. They have been through this routine before. When Jesus says, do you understand what I've done? And Peter, pick me. I know what you've done. He explains it, and Jesus saying, no, Peter, you got it all wrong. Well, so when Jesus says, do you understand? They all say, we don't have a clue. Nobody says a word because every time they say something, they know they're going to get it wrong, right? They have gotten to the point where they know they can't rush with an answer. They can't fill in the blank. They simply got to say, tell us. Do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher, this rabbi. You call me Lord. And that's right. Because it's who I am. It's what I've functioned here. It's what I've been for you and what I am. But if me, being those things, have washed your feet, you also should wash each other's feet. I did this as an example so that you should do as I have done for you. And Jesus, at that moment, tells them that at any moment, any place, any time it dawns on you that you're entitled, I have given you an example. Because what do you do when you discover you're the most powerful person in the room? Jesus says, if you find yourself in that spot, remember what I did for you. Because the reality is, 11 of these guys will go out and become powerful people. They're going to go out from that place, and because when Jesus dies and comes back to life, and when this kind of story gets out, these guys who have actually been with Jesus are going to be like rock stars, celebrities. People are going to be around them. People want to touch them. Jesus is going to tell them they're going to have the ability to heal people. They will share this message of Jesus. People will follow them around. People will listen to them. And they will have the opportunity every day of their life either to use that power for good, which in Jesus' perspective is for somebody else, or to use that power for themselves. And Jesus says, I want you to know, each and every time, any moment you kind of feel like, I got power, I'm entitled to do this, remember my example. See, the question isn't, what am I entitled to? That's typically our question, isn't it? These are my rights. What are my rights? What are the things I get? What comes along with this? Do I get fries and the medium drink with that order, or do I have to buy them separately, right? What am I entitled? We think the question is always, what am I entitled to? When in reality, it's what will I do with what I've been entitled with? And Jesus says, listen, I'm going to tell you the truth. Servant is not greater than the master. The messenger is not greater than the one who sent him. You guys in this room are not greater than me. Don't forget that. But if you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. Let me ask you a question. Is Jesus really only talking about washing each other's feet? Or is Jesus talking about something greater than that? When he says you're going to be blessed to do it, is he talking about just any time you would sit down and wash somebody else's feet, that's when you're blessed? Or is he talking about something bigger and something deeper than that? See, what is the purpose of power? Think about your desire for power, because all of us have a desire for power. I mean, aren't there moments that you just wish you could be the most powerful person in the room? That you could tell your kids, pick that up, and they actually picked it up? Or you could tell somebody else, handle this because I'm working on this, and they actually handled that? What is the purpose of power? And that's an important question because especially I think for us as a nation. For us as a nation in the sense of somebody for president, but even more than that, what's the purpose of power in our structures? In our laws? In our rules and regulations? Is power there to control people? Or is power there to benefit the people? And the question really has to be, how do I leverage my power the way Jesus did? And I think it's a valid question. It's a question I've been personally wrestling with over the last few weeks as, again, stuff has happened in this country. As videos have come out, and a couple more have come out this week, of appearing that people got treated differently because of the color of their skin. Now, I know I don't know all the backstory on all those things. I don't want to rush to judgment. But in a couple of those cases, it's pretty hard not to come to some kind of conclusions. I mean, if you didn't see the one about the guy down in Miami, guy who works in a group home, autistic young man is out in the middle of the street with his little toy truck. The counselor's there sitting in the middle of the street trying to get him out of the street because he's autistic. He doesn't want to touch him and set him off. The police show up because they've heard somebody's out there with a gun. The counselor has his hands up and says, "I'm a counselor." He's got a toy truck. And the guy's in the hospital later because he got shot, says, "I thought it was okay because I had my hands up." And you need to understand something. My dad was a cop. I'm supportive of police officers. I think they have a terribly hard job. And the vast majority of them are good people. They're there to serve the community. And sometimes you get yourself in a situation that's over your head. Sometimes you've had a bad day, and that bad day goes even worse. But the explanation I heard was the guy who gets shot asked the officer why he got shot. He says, "I don't know." Later the story comes out, he was actually trying to shoot the autistic guy. Who was sitting there with a toy truck, or toy train, I guess it was, playing with it. Now again, I don't want to rush to judgment, but something has gone terribly wrong in our country. And it's not an easy situation to fix. And I'm not foolish enough to offer an explanation of how we can fix it. And I also want to resist the temptation for us as Christians to sort of wipe it away by saying, well, we know that in the end times, things will get worse, but Jesus is coming soon. Now, I hope Jesus comes soon. But that does not do away with having to do something today to change situations. And so the question has to be, how do you leverage the power that you have the way that Jesus did? And Jesus' answer is always for the sake and benefit of the other people in the room. If you look at Jesus' life, he is always about the other people, the other people. The story is the sinners and the tax collectors liked him. Why? Because Jesus was always about leveraging his power to bring them in. I mean, I love that line, sinners and tax collectors. Tells you how bad tax collectors were back then. That the sinners don't even want you included with them. You know, you got your own name. You're over there. Tax collectors, sinners, everybody over here, we're just, but tax collectors, you guys just take a couple steps away because we don't want anybody associated with that, right? But Jesus was consistently leveraging his power for other people. And I think it's a call for us as Christians to figure out, how do I leverage my power for other people? And again, I don't know how we're going to do this, but we are going to do something. Because we need to do something. Because life matters. Black lives matter. And historically in this country, they have not mattered as much as the rest of us. But the reality is, different places in the world, because of your ethnicity or the color of your skin, you are a less than. I grew up in California. Do you know who the less than were out in California? Take a guess. That's right. Mexicans, people from Mexico. They were the less thans. And everybody has a less than, except Jesus. And the early church had its own race relation wrestles. You had the Jews, who thought everybody else was less than. You had Gentiles, the Greeks. You had former slaves and current slaves. And they were all trying to figure out how this whole thing of leveraging our power for everybody, treating everybody as if they matter because everybody does matter, that everyone is equal in God's sight. How do we make that happen? And Jesus would simply say, remember what I did on that evening. When I laid off my sort of status and power and washed your feet and your feet and your feet and even yours, though you resisted, even your feet. And don't ever forget that you're any better than me. And if I'm willing to do it, you need to be willing to do it. Because sometimes things only get done when you stand up, roll up your sleeves, and get your hands dirty. So what if? What if today is not only your fresh start, but it's our fresh start? That's kind of what communion has a part to. This idea of washing our feet, because that's all that needs to get washed, sort of get cleaned up again and sort of head out again and take another shot at this thing called life. And some of you have come here today and you have some pretty dirty feet. And it's not because I have some special insight into your life. I just see how you walk in some weeks. It doesn't matter how dirty your feet are, because today's the day of opportunity. So what if today is really your fresh start? And what if today is the beginning of you leveraging your power for the others in your rooms? Because all of us have people in different rooms of our lives, right? You have people you work with. You have people you live with or live around. You have people you interact with, maybe hobbies, maybe sports, maybe exercise, maybe get together and hang out kind of friends. But what if today is really the beginning of leveraging your power for the other people in your room because you recognize that's what Jesus did? That he changed the way he thought about life and about his role and about what he could do on that day. Let me just share something with you that I'm becoming more and more convinced about. And it really is the way we're going to be heading as a church. Let me just read this to you. We dare not become a group of people who are content to gather together and believe the right things and behave the right ways and stop at that. Because let's be honest, that's kind of what we as Christians do really well, right? Come, have a great experience. Thank you, Jesus. We've got our acts kind of cleaned up. At least when we show up at church, we look good, right? And we can get satisfied with that. But we dare not become that, because if we do, we will no longer be followers. We will no longer be followers if we do that. We will be settlers who find ourselves uninterested, uncaring, and unconcerned about those who are different. And we are not going to do that. We will not do that. Because we will leverage our power for the good of everybody. We're going to figure out a way to try to change this world, even though that is an impossibility. Because we got to do something. And so my invitation to you today, as we wind this thing down, is simply this. I hope today, as you come forward and take this cup of juice, this little piece of bread, That this will be a reminder more than just simply Jesus died for me and we're celebrating his death and the hope that I have in him and the forgiveness of sins. But you will also see that as Jesus inviting us to actually take him into our lives. And by taking him into our life, by ingesting that our lives become different. That we begin to value the things that Jesus said. That the things we know will actually determine the things we do. And the thing that we know is that on that evening, Jesus was the only person that got up from that table. He's the only person that took care of the things that somebody should have taken care of. He was the only one willing to put himself at the lowest spot for the sake of everybody else. And as you eat this piece of bread today and as you drink this juice, I hope it'll be your statement to him that you want to follow him and do the same thing.